For the last 7 years, Big Ant have been the go-to developers for niche sports games, but after early success and praise, the last few years have been a bit rockier for the studio. And with the recent release of AO Tennis, Big Ant have hit a new low. Back in 2011, Big Ant released AFL Live, which is probably the most important game in AFL video game history, as it set a new bar for what AFL games could and should be. Big Ant earned huge praise from AFL fans who had been waiting a long time for a quality AFL game, and with the release of Rugby League Live 1 and 2, NRL fans jumped aboard the Big Ant bandwagon. The next sport for the studio to conquer was cricket, and they did just that with Don Bradman Cricket 14, which revolutionised the way cricket games played, and as a result received huge praise from fans and critics alike. The major hurdle that Big Ant faced with Cricket 14 was licensing. With so many teams, leagues and tournaments worldwide, it would have been just about impossible to fully license a cricket game. Big Ant's Cricket Academy allowed players to create and share the real-life players and teams that Big Ant couldn't afford to license. Many saw this as a genius move, as instead of wasting money on expensive licensing, Big Ant found a way to save that money while still having all the names that players would want to see, while also finding a way for the fans to have a greater involvement in the game. Big Ant continued their cricket series with Don Bradman Cricket 17, and this is when the slide downhill began. While the game had a lot of good ideas and improvements going for it, these were lost in the sea of bugs and glitches spread throughout the game, and while Big Ant did continue to try and fix these issues with ongoing patches, the game is still having issues to this day, over a year after its release. Maybe we shouldn't have expected any different. I mean, after all, even the game's trailer had a clearly visible glitch.
What kind of shit is that?
After the disappointment of Cricket 17, it took only a year before Big Ant were at it again with Ash's Cricket. For many, this was a bridge too far. Many fans were frustrated that Cricket 17 was still having problems, and yet the studio decided to push out a title that was clearly a rush job just to try and cash in on sales from the current Ashes series. In the space of just over a year, Big Ant had gone from a trustworthy and respected studio that had always valued quality over quantity to a studio that was putting out rush jobs and unfinished products to make a quick buck. Little did we know that it was only going to get worse. Over the last few weeks, Big Ant released their first attempt at a tennis game in AO Tennis, the key word being attempt at a tennis game. AO Tennis has been torn a new one by fans and critics alike, with the exception of this guy who says, if you ignore the visuals and lack of recognisable names, it's a true realistic tennis simulator. So basically, if you pretend everything bad about the game isn't there, then it's a really great game. Yeah, righto mate. The game features a very small roster of licensed players, with a number of big names not present. Probably the biggest problem for AO Tennis is its gameplay. With clunky animations that have absolutely no fluidity, playing the game is a very awkward experience. On top of this, the game features a day one patch that includes the career mode, so who knows what's actually included on the disc. AO Tennis has at this stage only been released in Australia and New Zealand, with a worldwide release scheduled for later in the year. Taking all this into account, it's pretty clear that Big Ant thought they'd rush the Australian and New Zealand release of this game to try and cash in on the Australian Open, while a delayed worldwide release gives them time to polish for whatever the real release date probably was. In response to the game's negative feedback, I saw someone post on Twitter about the hard work and hours that go into game development, and how we should think about this before delivering strong criticism to a studio or a game. But at what point do we stop cutting slack? When Big Ant released AFL Live in 2011, they claimed that their sports games were foundations that they would build off in the future, so we let them off the hook for the lack of game modes, features and overall poor presentation. Here we are 7 years later, and their games are still lacking in so many areas. And now they want us to accept this clearly unfinished excuse for a tennis game. In the past, I'd be prepared to give them the benefit of the doubt, but Big Ant aren't the studio they were only a few years ago. This isn't the Big Ant that gave up their chance at developing future AFL titles because they refused to rush and half-ass AFL Live 2. Ashes Cricket and AO Tennis are cash grab titles, and with these games, Big Ant have become the kind of studio that they earn so much respect for not being in the past. So guys, let us know in the comments what you think about AO Tennis. Maybe you like the game, or are you also disappointed in Big Ant's downfall? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so sound away in the comments below. Also be sure to like, subscribe and check us out on our other social media platforms. You can find those links in the description box.